Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to be the host of today's event. My name is Ian Teixeira, and I'm of NOVATalks, a student-led organization based in City Nova, with the goal of motivating people to think outside the box while filling the gaps of our curricula through talks and other activities. And I would like to welcome and thank all of you, viewers, speakers, and the sponsor of this event, EDP, and their program, Planeta Zero, to the fourth edition of Fridays for the Planet. Fridays for the Planet, it's an event that usually occurs on Fridays and revolves around environment, sustainability, being the main topic of today's edition, biomimicry, which is the inspiration and mimic of nature's strategies in order to solve human design challenges. With us today, we have Richard MacCowan, a biomimicry enthusiast who has been a teacher in many universities, a founder of some companies such as Biomimicry UK, and Carlos Rego, a Portuguese designer, the current head of design and biomimicry thinking at the Logoplaste Innovation Lab, being both of them award-winning designers who try to implement biomimicry in their daily routine. The event is going to consist of the presentation by both speakers of their experience, opinions, and life, followed by a moment while trying to shoot some curveballs. Carlos and Richard will answer some questions while discussing the matter between them. Ending with a typical Q&A, like always, you can write your questions on the chat or wait for the end to make them. I would like to ask to everyone here who is watching to turn off their microphones and cameras throughout the event and only turn them on when called to make a question at the end. Without further ado, I would let everyone enjoy the event. And Richard or Carlos, any of you can start your introduction.
Richard, you start?
I'll let you start because I can still practice my Portuguese for another 15 minutes.
Okay. First, I would like to thank Ian for inviting me to be part of the NOVATalks event. It's a pleasure to be here with my dear friend Richard to talk about biomimicry, and hope that we can discuss interesting subjects about biomimicry and how we can bring it to more effectively to organizations. The goal of what I am going to present you, it's not to give some sort of a lecture about what biomimicry is, or it's not all about. We can talk a little bit about it when we start talking and discussing the subject. When I was preparing my presentation for this, I thought that it's about 12 years now that we start using biomimicry thinking methodology at Logoplaste Innovation Lab. And it has been an amazing journey with its challenges, of course. And I thought that it could be more interesting for our audience. It's to share, based on those 12 years of experience, it's some take-home lessons on biomimicry and something that I've been learning through this biomimicry journey about how to best implement it and integrate it on the corporation. So the starting point, we as humans, as a species, of course, we were able to achieve amazing things as a species. We found a way of surpass our natural limitations. We found ways of flying, of becoming faster, of extending even our natural life expectation. But we also tend, through our history of evolution, to have a tendency to compete with nature and to put ourselves in some sort of a pedestal against the natural world, in which we basically found ourselves as being a superior species. And that strategy can hardly be seen as something that was successful. When we face the environmental crisis, global crisis that we are all now facing, it's very hard to call it a successful strategy of competition against nature. And on that journey, we are not just terminating all life forms on this planet, but in the end, we are actually contributing for us to even the human species to become an endangered species on this planet, and we are definitely compromising the future of the coming generations. And this is all due because we've been through centuries, and especially in the last century, we've been relying our economic models based on constant competition, on models of infinite growth, and that are eternal, in which we are almost trying to achieve immortality through what we do. And the result is a growing production of waste that we don't have a single clue of what to do with it. And the fact is that our model doesn't follow the principles that you can observe in any natural system, that it's mostly based on collaboration between all life forms. It's based on prosperity, and it's also built on regeneration. And this is key aspects that we all need to take into account. And if I have some sort of take-home lessons to share with you, it will be, first, if you are serious in embracing biomimicry, is you need to set, first of all, a purpose for what we are doing. As with everything in life that we decide to embrace, it's always much more effective, the results that we are going to achieve, if we define very clearly a reason to use something. And in this case, to give you an example of my personal case, I work in a company called Logoplaste, specialized in the development and manufacturing of rigid plastic packaging. And the background of the company, which was founded by this gentleman, Mr. Marcel de Bouton, which has been a patron through his entire life about sustainable packaging, and you revolutionize the specific industry of packaging with the industrial model that was the base of the birth of Logoplaste. And when I started embracing biomimicry, the very first thing, the very main objective was to define a vision. Our vision was to build the future Logoplast plants that fully mimic the natural systems, to make it much more sustainable and regenerative. And although we start using it at product level to help us support the development of packaging, and here you can see a couple of images of some of the packaging that we've been developing through these last 12 years. The main impact that you have when you adopt a discipline of biomimicry is that that impact, it's much higher if you take it from just being focused on the project and on the product, and you bring it to the whole system, and you rethink your process, the way you do things. And that's what we are actually doing right now, in partnership with Biomimicry 3.8, that is helping us build the new the model for the new Logoplast plants, in which basically our objective is to build a plant as sustainable as a forest, that it's not only environmentally sustainable, but it's regenerative and contributes positively for the healing and regeneration of the community where we install our plants. The second take-home lesson is go ahead. You should not wait for something to happen. If you really want it to happen, and if you want to show what biomimicry can do, don't wait for an opportunity to do it. Create that opportunity. Take the first step to use this methodology in the development and to try to solve any sort of problem that you might be facing at the time. You can use biomimicry to basically tackle any sort of problem, from a design challenge, an engineering challenge, a science challenge, an economical challenge, a social problem, anything. So define that challenge and embrace it and go ahead with trying to find a solution in nature. For example, at Logoplaste, our first approach to biomimicry, we did it proactively. So when we were developing the Vitalis bottles, which was the very first project in which we used the biomimicry thinking methodology, we were not waiting for our client to ask us to do that. There was this specific project that had all the conditions that we believed was interesting to start using the biomimicry methodology, and we did it. And then we presented to our client with great results. It's a bottle that it's still now on the market, and so it's really very important that you take the first step. The third take-home lesson is you need to deliver. Everybody feels inspired by nature, okay? But if you want to adopt biomimicry thinking methodology, and if you want that approach to be effective in its integration in your corporation and on your team, you need to show tangible results of using that approach. For example, I work in a company where more than 90% of my colleagues come from engineering background. And as you know, it's very important when you are developing an engineering solution that either it works or it doesn't work, but you need to prove that it works. So for example, on the design of the EcoVer bottle, we used a set of tools that allowed us not only to do the design based on natural models, but also we used, for example, in this case, finite element analysis tools to assess that the structural system based on biomimicry that we were using was actually producing tangible results. So, for example, on you can see the body of the bottle that we were designing without the biomimicry structures and with a weight of 30 grams. And right next to it, you can see the same body, but with the biomimicry structures with 25 grams. So we were able to demonstrate that in a very precise, very tangible way that we were able to save 5 grams on this bottle by using the biomimicry structures. And so for any field of expertise that you might be using, you need to deliver and be very tangible in the results that you produce. You also need to put biomimicry, if you are serious about it, you need to put it at the center. That means that on an innovation process where you need to address human needs, where you need to assess technical aspects of implementation of opportunity to innovate, or even when you are evaluating the best business model to take that solution into market, they all need to be driven by biomimicry factors, in which basically everything needs to ask this basic question, which is what thrives life, what supports life, what creates conditions conducive to life. Because many times when we see at what might be sustainable, you are not developing solutions that are sustainable just because they are recyclable. There are a bunch of other variables that make a solution truly sustainable or not. It doesn't matter, for example, in packaging, if I use a bottle that weighs 100 grams just purely because of aesthetic reasons, when I am able to do it with 15 grams to perform exactly the same function. So in both cases, the material could be 100% recyclable, but I'm not doing everything I can to optimize that design, for example. So this means, this approach of putting biomimicry at the center of innovation process means that we need to move or evolve from a human-centered innovation process in which we've been relying most of our innovation in the last century, in which we've been addressing human needs in a very blind way, without properly assessing the environmental costs of addressing those needs. We need to evolve to a life-centered innovation. It's not that we are no longer concerned in addressing human needs, of course, but we should be much more critical in the way we address those needs. We should really be much more critical in evaluating if the environmental costs of addressing a specific need are worth it. And last but not the least, you need to always be prepared to adapt to ever-changing conditions of the scenario where you are working, and evolve through. For example, in my period of 12 years using biomimicry at Logoplaste, the journey has not been easy all the time. But the contrary, we've been faced with a ton of challenges, of course, because biomimicry takes you completely out of your comfort zone. It shows you other challenges that you were not even expecting that you had to face in the beginning, but you need to do what basically all life forms do on their ecosystems. They are constantly adapting to the challenges that they need to face in order to be successful in their survival strategy. So you need to always be prepared for challenges and adapt to them and evolve. And this is what I have to share with you.
Carlos actually said a lot of things which I'll reiterate, and that one of the things that may as well start off with is that evolving to survive, the changing landscape of the design and manufacturing and materials, although less so materials. But I've found throughout the years with my background is actually adapting design models, where you look at problems. I started off very much looking at the bottom, looking at functions, but the way I've now go back to, it's all the way back to my childhood. So there is a method to my rambling that I spent a lot of time in the Highlands of Scotland. As you can tell, I'm not from Portugal, though maybe I could have a funny Portuguese accent or Scottish accent. I don't know. But I was always taught about the importance of the life being interconnected. So seeing how, if, say a cow or some cattle or sheep died and there's next to a stream, how you'd understand how, the germs or the decomposition parts, into the stream, or the stream would get blocked by the carcass, and then that would actually have impacts downstream and water flowing into the river, but then also understanding then that river flowing into the sea lochs. And because my grandparents there for a long time, there was this big rise in kind of salmon farming and growing mussels, and you actually saw that there was a lot of changes to the biodiversity because of the chemicals and into the feedstock for the sea farming that we're doing, and this was impacting all around to the amount of fish you would see in the sea loch, and then you would actually see less of seals as well. And then there was a big outbreak of disease in the seals, and this was all passed around. And I very much understood the kind of interconnective of the environment and the ecosystem, the habitats to everything. And it was a kind of message that I took. I mean, my background is actually real estate finance and development, which through random luck, I've got back in kind of touch with kind of the sustainability nature side of things. I always found clients very unwilling to adapt and be more reactive and start thinking more about the environmental impacts of what they were doing. And actually, one of the reasons I am where I am, because I get made redundant in the last economic crash, 2008, and that was the best thing that ever could have happened to me. So not at the time, because I was unemployed for about a year, but then I took a job working with a design agency, and we were working with clients, big property developers in UK and across Europe. We were even working with Lego at one point on their new development called Centre for Children in Denmark. But all these different things learn me about the human behavior, and something that Carlos picked up in the human center, but also the creativity, the enjoyment. And it's something I picked up with the Lego project. It's about learning from things and how you can play with things and understand how things work. And I've taken that forward as I was trained in the design as urban design, and then subsequently connecting into all the other things. Because I've now learned if you are trained in a certain design, you're actually a problem solver. So, and this came out when I was doing my doctorate in urban systems, and I was just asked to give a workshop to super yacht designers, which you think, wow, super yacht, that's quite exciting, but they're just designing floating homes that never go anywhere. But one of the keynote speakers there says he was an architect, but he was also an engineer, product designer, designed his own fashion range, and a DJ. And he just said, if you're top problem solving, you can do anything. You bring in the specialists. So it made me start thinking around this idea of I'm actually more of a generalist. There's a great book which I'll get Ian and the team at NOVATalks to share called it's basically called Range, and it's by David Epstein, and it's how generalists will survive in a specialist world, or thrive actually in a specialist world. And it's about understanding if you know the bigger process. So I take this on board. So I've got a number of companies. We started Biomimicry UK 2013. I was doing my doctorate, and then, I thought another company that came out when we're doing that is looking at horses and the well-being of horses and water management, called Smart Stable, which is great. It's very interesting. I cannot ride a horse. I don't think I've ever been in a horse actually, but I think I'm talking to the right end. It's the one with the tail, isn't it? That's the one you talk to. Yeah. But what we found there is the key thing there is building the right team of people, either specialists or generalists, to get things done. And this led me to setting up Biomimicry Innovation Lab in December 2019, thinking, yes, 2020 is going to be a great year. Well, it kind of was, apart from the fact that we're all living in flatland of Zoom. But from that, I decided to flip things around and realized, back to the thing with Carlos and evolving to survive, is I realized that you need lots of different fluid models to solve problems, and it should always be understanding what your client's way of working is as well. And so if you're working product design, understanding, so example being looking at the bottles more about the material selection, but also then looking into the structures and forms and kind of the growth models that you can actually look at mimicking or taking the principles from. Whereas things like we're also looking into manufacturing in cities, is understanding the processes and systems. So you're seeing those changes, something you can measure over time. Because some of the big areas we're working in at the moment is looking at kind of next generation manufacturing. How do you build in augmented reality and VR with robots and people in the same places. But then also then stepping all the way back to understanding the simple and the basic things. So other projects we're now looking at is, well, actually in the development phase at the moment, is our regenerative agriculture. And this ties into the work that Carlos was mentioning on the forest as a factory, is very much of looking at how can we go back and learn from the natural world to do regenerative agriculture. And this is for 2 projects, one in Congo and one in Nepal. So looking at tying into the local conditions and actually building in these, at the moment, smaller scale agricultural processes, looking to things like permaculture and other regenerative practices. So you're learning from the land, you're learning from looking at rich biodiverse habitats and looking at building these models in. And this is very much something I'm taking forward with even work we're doing now, building up an innovation fund, an investment fund, which we'll be producing in the next, well, the first stages of that in the next few months. So one of the things that I always do, and I think Carlos alluded to a little, is actually diving in to every project, you've got to understand, can it be designed? Can it be manufactured? Is there a market need for it? Will it sell? So you're tying in the marketing as well. Is it going to be profitable? Because what happens if you use a material that's very, very expensive? It's very cool, but so making a plastic bottle out of a composite material, including graphene and I don't know, dust from a rare diamond. Don't steal that idea, Carlos, or you can have it actually. But the idea is that bottle is going to cost a lot of money. So you've got to start thinking of all these things right at the beginning, because one of the things that I've found is through time working is you don't want to generate lots of ideas. You want to understand where the main problem points are and looking at the path of most resistance through the design to actually understand whereabout do you start tackling things. Is it the manufacturer? Is it the design? Manufacture is very hard to change because you've got changing machinery in a factory. We'll keep going back to seeing the bottling plants. If anyone's ever seen videos or been to them, the thousands they go through an hour or even a minute. You can't just say, right, we're going to swap this machine with something better, because that's a scary thing to do, because you've got up, down, upstream and downstream to consider. So one of the things we're also building in a slightly different model to the one that Carlos's company is working with is actually understanding the value of ecosystem services, not just in where the factory's based or the city's based, but how they're connected as well throughout the supply chain. And we're building in these metrics so you can actually measure these, and this is tying into the processes, so you can actually measure them at the same time. So just to summarize, although it was a bit of a chat, so key things like Carlos mentioned, do it every day. Biomimicry is one of these things that can't be done on an ad hoc basis. It's like any tools, like if anyone remembers going, long division at school or different things like that, you will forget it. You need to start by understanding and doing it all the time. I would also say, try and find some challenges that offer a number of constraints from industry, and there's a lot of open innovation platforms out there. And these allow you to target different areas. And it gives you a chance to kind of think about these constraints. And the final thing is actually something is that consider the bigger picture when you're mapping these out, when you're identifying the problem, is actually start looking at where they're all connected, because you never know where you actually might be able to come up with kind of solving the problem. But if you're a systems thinker, one of the things is you're never really solving the problem. You're just making the system more effective and more resilient. So that's my 3 takeaways.
Gwynlyn Mosdale, you want to say something? You have your hand.
Hi, just switched on my video to ask the question. Thanks for the 2 introductions. It was great to hear. Since you're both practitioners and time is money, how long are your projects typically when you start a project? And they might be shorter because of you using finite element models again and again and again, and you know how to do it. But I'm just curious if you do other projects and how long they last.
Wow.
Richard, or?
Yeah, I mean, so some of the projects we're working on with cities are about a year. Some of the internal work we're developing looking at AI and computational models. I'm looking at a 2-year pipeline, or some of the other ones that have come out from Carlos's nemesis, Professor Julian Vincent, is about 5-year pipeline. I would say we've been culling out a lot of research for this investment fund, and some of the projects and looking at biomaterials, you're looking at 10 to 15 years to come to the market, because, you know, I'm sure a lot of you have read about all these great biomaterials of the future that can do all the things that plastic can do and fully recyclable or compostable. But then you speak to the people and they can make one a week. Now think about how many thousands of bits of material. So they've got to go through all those factors to develop. It's just, if it's game-changing technology, it could be even longer. But for me, my projects, yeah, I would say some of them quicker ones, 6 months, some of them up to 2 years. The longer the better, especially if clients are paying us, though. That's the good thing.
Well, in what concerned me and Logoplaste, we are driven by usually very tight deadlines. So especially on packaging, you really need to be fast in taking the solutions to market. Of course, the time that we need to develop a specific project can vary widely, depending of the complexity of the challenge that we have at hand. We had projects that took, using biomimicry, that took 2 to 3 years to see the light of the day and to be released on the market. And we had projects that just took a couple of months. Of course, for example, in the beginning, when we started using biomimicry at our innovation lab, we only had a couple of natural models that we've been studying that we could apply to the specific packaging sphere. But through these 12 years, now we have a much broader range of natural models that we rely upon. And we also gain much more experience in the way we study new natural models. So, for example, to give you an example, Willem, 12 years ago, if I had to start studying a new natural model from scratch for a project, it could take me 2 to 3 months to try to deconstruct that natural model and understand its biological strategies, translate them into design principle, and then start doing brainstorming of bio-inspired ideas. And now when we are able to, in less than a month, to start deconstructing a natural model. So of course we are able to do that because we also belong to we are part of a much bigger network in what concerns the installed knowledge. So we use as a reference a ton of research work from biologists from all over the world, and use their research papers to help us understand the natural models, so that we can as quickly as possible understand, for example, what is the potential of that natural model to help us solve a specific problem. So it can vary, but as Richard was saying, it depends of the complexity of what you have to. For example, we are now for a year now working with Biomimicry 3.8 on developing the new model for the Logoplaste plant, and that, of course, it's much more complex challenge to solve than to develop a specific bottle based on biomimicry thinking. So it varies.
It's interesting you mentioned that, Carlos, actually, because one of the tools, and we obviously spoke about this a few months ago, is we're actually developing is how to take that month of research down to a couple of days. And that's something, there's not just in the UK, there's another bunch of people doing that at Georgia Tech and in France as well. And where our aim is to tap into not just the research, but the field notes, all the information in Natural History Museum, so you can build up this catalogue and actually create a visual platform that you start looking, what am I looking for, what functions, what trade-offs, processes, and it allows you to then understand, because I know a lot of you are scientists or studying to be scientists, but I bet the first time, Carl, I can, looking at a design paper is where do you start? And I've done this teaching, junior designers in companies as well as first year undergrad product designers, and their heads explode when they read a research paper because, most of it is not useful for what we need. And it's written in such a convoluted language. You need to know is, how does this natural organism solve this problem? And quite often, I don't know about you, Carlos, but quite often it's a paragraph, and that's only a bit, but you can spend hours just finding, and then obviously you've got it down to a knack, but.
Well, for me, the key parts of the work that I usually do as a biomimicry practitioner is in the same way that I rely on the methodology of design thinking to solve these more related design problems. I also rely heavily on the methodology of design thinking and all different steps that I need to take so that I can structure the entire process. So, and as you gain more experience using that methodology, you become faster in defining the scope of the project, identifying the challenge that you need to solve, in biologizing the challenge, which in biomimicry is absolutely critical, because most of the time the challenge that you start with is a challenge that cannot directly be related with nature, and you need to translate it into a question that actually you could ask nature how it would solve that specific problem. It's like the kind that dilemma of I cannot design a lamp based on nature, because nature does not design lamps, but nature does illuminate, and there's millions of organisms that rely on the concept of light to survive. So I need to put the right question when I'm doing the research, and when I'm able to do that right question, that can immediately filter through the database of natural models that I need to look into. So for example, 12 years ago, I would be losing much more time looking into natural models that became useless on my research. And now of course, through experience, I'm much more pragmatic in looking into natural models. I've learned, as Richard was saying, my first impact when I start consulting research papers was that, oh my God, this is rocket science for me. But after 12 years, now I'm much more experienced in looking into research papers from biology. And now I'm able to much quickly to consult them and evaluate if they have the information that I need or not. So.
Yeah, and I think that adds into the question that Rita asked about working with biologists and engineers, and it depends on the project and where you need them. I find as well, sometimes when you're working too heavily with people from universities, and this is no offense to anyone here as an academic, is sometimes they don't work at the same pace as you need, but you just need to bring them in at the right time to ask specific questions. So in the case of working on ecological work as ecologists, but I'm also then, in my company, I've either got some, or in various other companies, engineers as well, industrial designers, product designers, other things as architects as well. So it's very much building up and understanding you need to then collaborate with others, because the projects are inherently interdisciplinary.
Multidisciplinary is the key for biomimicry, because if you look at to biomimicry in its foundations, when Janine Ben-Hughes founded the biomimicry, was because she was a biologist, and but she also was very familiar and knew everybody in many different areas of expertise. And she's by her talks with economists and engineers and architects and scientists, she was able to know that they were looking for solutions for problems that actually the biologists had the answer. But the problem is that the biologists were not talking with the designers, with the architects, with the scientists, and as such, so the main goal of biomimicry was actually to bring biology to the design table, was to bring a biologist to the innovation team, so that you could basically not rely to solve the problems that we are facing in our society, not rely on our own belly buttons, which is basically what we've been doing since the Industrial Revolution. Many people in our society still believes that the answers for the biggest challenges that we are facing rely on these last 2 centuries, which, if you look at the entire lifespan of life on Earth, it's less than a quarter of a second. So it doesn't make sense in terms of analysis, statistics, and so biomimicry, it's multidisciplinary from the start. So like in any innovation team, you are stronger if you have multidisciplinary teams. So
I'd just say, I mean, I'd also recommend people look up a lot of the work of researchers in the UK and America. So the Wyss Institute in Georgia Tech, and Thomas Speck in Germany, and CBOS in France. So there are a lot of work, and I mean, Germany has been developing this kind of work from the 1960s, and there's a lot of, going back almost 200 years of work coming together. But it's quite fun. We talked about this the other day. There's a research paper out there written by a biologist when she was doing her PhD, and it actually said that projects are less successful when the biologist is part of the team, which
it depends of the mindset.
Yeah, because I mean, I don't know how many biologists have you met, Carlos, that get engineering and design. I know 3.
No, it's not a matter of the biologist background in engineering or in other field. It's for me, it's all about mindset. I already knew biologists that are too closed in their own sphere, and they are focused in studying biology, but they are not that concerned in sharing that knowledge to use that knowledge to help make, for example, our planet more sustainable, and to help build economical models that are really truly sustainable and that thrive life. And then fortunately I knew several biologists that they were familiar with the goals of biomimicry, and they have the proper mindset of the collaborative mindset of sharing knowledge and being part of an innovation team. So
I mean,
that's the same for all professions. In engineer, I've met engineers that are also very conservative in their approaches, and they feel happy solving problems in the same way that they've been solving for their entire life. And I know engineers that if you just ask them to do the same thing over and over again, they hate it. What drives them is to have things that take them out of their comfort zone, something that really what motivates them. It's something that it's in the beginning, it's almost even perceived as not having a solution or being near to being impossible. So, and designers, for sure, you also know designers with the same mindset.
Yeah,
So,
I think it's a mindset, definitely, and it's tapping into that. I mean, there's another question that's come. I hope Ian doesn't mind me looking at these as well. How can we connect the blue economy and biomimicry? Yeah, I mean, this is something that's come up recently in discussions. A lot of, with the growth of kind of algae-based fuels, biofuels, a lot of different areas you can actually start developing from seaweed and looking at all different things from bioplastics to clothing, textiles and feedstocks. So very much tapping into, you can do kind of directly mimicking those processes, looking at how those things, so, the construction, or you can start even looking into those principles and tying them into the biotechnology, where people are looking at abstracting some of the things for medical applications as well. And the blue economy is very important. I don't know, Jasnavi, if you are working in that field, if you're working in seaweed or aquaponics, I would look at the Lloyd's Register Foundation, because they've got additional funding to help projects bridge the gap between a feasibility study in the lab into more of an industry setting. And because they ensure shipping, so they're very much looking into this area of kind of the next generation biofuels and all the things, because the blue economy, amazing work of how to stop cows burping methane is feeding them seaweed. There's that kind of, and there's a whole host of different types of algae tied into it, and that's where you get into this biotech and jumping into biodesign. Because for me, I think it's very much actually considering actually tying it all together, because yes, there's a philosophical thing there as well, but I think to solve a lot of challenges, we need to start mixing all these together. Neri Oxman does a lot of great work on this.
Well, one thing that I believe it's important to clarify here is what biomimicry is all about and what it's not all about. And biomimicry is not about bio-assisted solutions or bioutilizations. So it's not about going into a forest, cut trees to build furniture in wood instead of plastics, for example. It's not what biomimicry is all about. It's not also about bio-assisted solutions like building dairy products and using the milk of cows to produce milk or yogurts. Biomimicry, it's about learning from nature. Okay, there's nothing necessarily wrong with bioutilization or bio-assisted solutions if you do it properly. Okay, but it's not biomimicry. Okay, biomimicry, it's, put it plain simple, it's learning with nature. It's having a challenge, it's having and going into nature and really putting a question. It's by studying nature, you study nature trying to find out a solution for your problem. So you don't use nature, you learn from nature, which is a different mindset that you need to use. For example, one of the most common questions that I come up when I talk with someone about biomimicry for the first time is that they ask me, oh, biomimicry, it's about biomimetics. And my answer is, it is, but it's 1/3 of the biomimicry equation. The biomimetic part, it's one of the 3 essential elements of biomimicry that we usually call the emulate part. Yes. Yes, yeah.
I was just, because we are getting close to an hour, and
okay.
And one question that we had a bit earlier was about biomimicry in healthcare. They were asking about the latest technological applications of biomimicry in the healthcare, not only in Portugal, but in the UK, since you have you and Richard. Like Sharklet, they are asking because of the recent years have been discovering examples like Sharklet at US, and are examples like that exist in Europe itself?
Yeah, well, in Europe, so the Wyss Institute in Harvard have recently opened up a center in Switzerland. I would also look into the NCCR Bio-Inspired Materials cluster there as well. Imperial College are developing applications in medical care based on how wood wasps lay eggs, a wood wasp ovipositor. There's a company called Carbon Metrics that recently spun out of Bristol as well. Their previous company just sold to a pharmaceutical company for $800 million. That was after 3 years of this guy coming out of his PhD. All his photos, he now smiles, which I can understand why. We do have a large list actually, because we've just done a horizon scan of the entire academic sector in the UK, and there's a lot of basically medical applications. So what I can do is, the top of my head, and they're the only few I can think of going forward. Yeah. But I can put together a list for.
Richard, do you recall the name? I know that there was a lab that they were also studying the tardigrades, the water bears, to develop basically to apply their principles to vaccines, because one of the main challenges, and in the last year we've been faced with that, it's the storage of vaccines are very important, and they demand very specific, they need to be in the cold, and so they're, especially when you need to deliver them in underdeveloped countries, there's every year there are tons and tons of vaccines that are wasted because of those storage conditions that are not maintained. And there was a lab, but I don't recall the name.
I can't remember the name either.
They were using, basically they were studying tardigrades. I don't know if you are familiar with tardigrades. Yes. They are also called water bears, extremophiles, that are able to live in extreme living conditions, like, for example, the inside of volcanoes. And they were learning from the biological principles of the tardigrades to basically develop a conservation process for vaccines, for any sort of vaccine that would allow that vaccine to just be to resist much more to deterioration in harsh conditions. So
no, I don't know that. I mean, one of the other ones, the funny ones I actually talked about on radio a number of years ago, is a beetle penis inspired catheter. So this researcher chopped off beetle penises for his paid to do that. That's one job, and then he found a catheter that's super flexible based on this, basically a beetle penis. There's those kind of things as well. And I'm just going through my list of medical applications. I think we've got about 500 different academics in the UK pushing out companies, from everything going down to neuroscience, down to wound dressing. There is a 3M, the adhesives company. They have looked at giraffes and how giraffes are able to pump blood around the body. And what they've found is they've actually developed a compression bandage for humans for their ankles based on this technology. So if you type in 3M and giraffe, I suppose, I can't remember exactly. Anyway, it's put on the list for a TV series that I'm working with that's coming out later in the year. It's quite an interesting one. So yes, there's lots and lots of medical applications. Johnson & Johnson, you've got a lot of the big medical companies.
Even healing plastics. There are also, I'm very bad with names. So, but I know also of a lab that it's developing research on material healing. So that, for example, when you are in a specific scenario and some sort of stress damage the material of, imagine a plane, or that material has properties that starts healing itself. I know also of that. So
yeah, there's a lot of aerogels and biogels. You've got things like looking at slugs. Again, the Wyss Institute are developing from the enzymes of slugs ways to deliver medicine. Other areas of, there's lots and lots of even pharmaceuticals and smart drugs as well. Thank you, Gwilym, for putting some, there you go, Biomimicry Our glamorous assistant.
Okay.
For putting them in the chat. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Gwilym.
You and I are getting old. It's like two old people talking on the bench about what they had for breakfast.
Yeah. Oh, the worst part is even when I was younger, I was very bad with names. So
besides this,
there was also
I was about to say that other people were asking other stuff, and there were if someone keeping the idea of biologists, if biologists wants to follow this path, do any of you have any suggestions about some masters they could follow up after being a biologist, or masters, or some areas they could go into?
Well, the Biomimicry Institute already offers some specific training in biomimicry, like the one that I did. And usually those trainings, they offer several levels of training that goes from basic introduction to a Master of Science at the Arizona University. And basically anyone from any field can attend that training. So, for example, when I did my specialist program, I had colleagues from not only biology, but also from architecture, engineering, business. So it's very vast. So my recommendation would be for a biologist is to start maybe with the basics. And if you go to the Biomimicry 3.8 website, they can guide you through those trainings, and maybe even just give a very quick introduction to the biomimicry field. It will be enough for a biologist. And if they feel that they need to go. Sorry?
I said, or they can use our online training platform we're launching soon.
Yes, so there's my advice would be for not only for a biologist, but for anyone that might be watching this conversation, if they are interested in getting to know more about biomimicry and getting a proper training, it's to go to Biomimicry 3.8, which is the entity that was founded by Janine Ben-Hughes and Dana Baumeister, that basically they created the concept of biomimicry. For me, it's the best place to get biomimicry training. So there's also, I noticed there was a question from André Trindade, that he was asking about how is the biomimicry scene in Portugal.
Yeah, I put in speak to Teresa.
Yeah.
What I was about to say is that if you want to answer that very quickly, because other people were asking about that, because we have to end the event. So if you can answer that.
Okay. The biomimicry scene in Portugal, it's quite small. I know there. When I did the training, I was actually the first Portuguese to attend the biomimicry training. But you have people that are not directly related with biomimicry that are doing an amazing work in teaching what I might call biomimicry, even if they don't call it biomimicry. Like, for example, you have Miguel Prazeres from Instituto Superior Técnico that teaches for quite a long time now what you might call biomimicry discipline in the engineering and all sorts of courses in Instituto Superior Técnico. He is, besides being an amazing guy, he is a brilliant person that knows immensely about the subject. There's also a biologist named Louise Nunes that she's a teacher at University of Castelo Branco. I believe that she also she teaches also in some university in Lisbon, I believe. She's a biologist, also a brilliant person that also teaches a little bit to their biology students the concept of biomimicry. She's very, very familiar with biomimicry, with the biomimicry discipline. And as a corporation that I know of, Logoplaste is the main corporation in Portugal that uses biomimicry in its innovation process.
I'm just typing, I put in the link to Biomimicry Iberia. I'm also putting in, I would look at the Biomimicry, the Fraunhofer Institute in Germany as well. They're a private research institute, and type in biomimetics and bionics. And I know Carlos was talking about this, biomimicry is different. There actually is a lot of convergence, and biomimetics, bioinspiration, bionics are all effectively the same now because everybody's solving.
But they are not the same.
Well, we can.
They are not the same because
we've been having these discussions because I sit in the ISO standards for biomimetics.
But there's a very clear reason why they are not the same, because in biomimicry, before you start the emulation, you need to be very concerned about respecting nature and standing for nature in all, and not using a lens that it's doministic towards nature. And many times I witnessed, for example, in bionics, people that, they mimic some natural principle, they mimic some life form and some nature solution, but they are not concerned about the sustainability of what they are doing in the end. So they can develop something that it's bio-inspired, but it's with a dreadful environmental impact. So, and biomimicry, you really need first to be aware of the ethos part, the ethical part of the practice, and have the conscience of what lens you are using when you are relating with nature, and only then you are on the right position to start emulating nature. Otherwise, you will be just having an incomplete observation of nature and studying nature in a very incomplete way that can you can develop a solution that it's inspired by nature, but for sure it will be incomplete in its essence.
I'll disagree with that, because if you look into the Bionics network in Germany, and their 40 million euro sustainable architecture program about creating lightweight materials and minimizing waste for architecture. And I'm just trying to find in bionics in Fraunhofer, one of the top ones came up was a biodegradable packaging. So I will disagree with Carlos, because these words are interchangeable, and we've got this phrase now that is coming out a lot, is called BioM star, because at the end of the day we're trying but
the problem it's not, for example, Fraunhofer. I respect immensely the work being done by Fraunhofer or the Viz Institute, and but the problem is that many people use the term bionics to develop something that has nothing to do with biomimicry.
Yeah, but a lot of people use the word biomimicry to push products that have nothing to do with nature, and it's just greenwashing as well. So you could tie it into
yes,
a
of
lot
course,
of those arguments.
of course.
So I think we can agree to disagree. I mean, I try and take the best of all worlds, and I do think that there's a lot of historical things out there. And for me, a lot of the work that I see, until somebody says their work is sustainable and they can prove it, because it goes back to that question when we were both in that panel session in Cambridge, Carlos, when somebody said, why don't you just make plastic bottles?
Yeah.
And it's the same thing as me. It's like, if
true.
I've worked in yacht design or, cities and all these things, is why do people not use all these building materials? And the key thing I think we've both answered separately in the past is it's about the supply chain and the transition. So I think we're all working. The way I see is the Biomimicry 3.8 is great, but they're aiming for the 2015. We need to step back and look at all the transitions as we move away from fossil fuel-based plastics, and then we can get those rise of the bioplastics when we can actually get them to a state where they actually work. Because I don't know about you, I keep going back to the plastics thing, is Australia's just banned biodegradable packaging, because I think it's a good thing until we can invent a way to dispose of it or recycle or compost it in the right way.
If anyone has any further questions or would like to ask any of you anything, you can leave your contacts here in NOVATalks. We will, if anyone asks us, we will deliver your contacts so they can reach you and ask you anything else, because we see that a lot of people still want to know more about this, but we are really reaching the end. And so I would like to thank everyone that is watching, everyone to have stuck here for this hour. I'd like to thank the viewers, to thank the speakers, to thank ADP, our sponsor. And it was a lovely event. Follow NOVATalks on our social media, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. Another events we will talk there. And again, thank you all for being present here today.